Old Man Sarge here. I haven't done a video in a long time, but I wanted to do this one because I'm about ready to start a new project. Global 1936, put out by Historical Board Gaming. I finally accumulated the pieces that I wanted to be able to do the game, or to play the game, and to film it, and to put out battle reports on it. It's a lot more extensive, a lot more rules, a lot more detail, a lot more flexibility, I believe, a lot more, there's going to be just immense, huge numbers of strategies I'm thinking. Don't know that yet, but by looking at the map and looking at all the rules and such, I think that there's a lot of strategy involved in it, and I think there's a lot of planning. You have to probably plan out a few turns instead of just one or two. So here are the pieces. So what I've done is I've put them into different categories here. So I've got the infantry here with the different choices that you have. So infantry have different categories of infantry in this game. They have militia, they have regular infantry, which is just a regular guy. They have cavalry, mountain troops, marines, airborne. They even have ski troops. I think the Finnish expansion really puts them in. And then there's some country specific, like for Germany, they have the Volkssturm. Camera's not gonna, which are basically their home guard. And so, like for example, militia they're cheap. They only cost $2, but they can't move normally. Volkssturm are the same, but they can actually move within the German territories because it's the home guard. So the easiest way to me to explain how this works is just simply like we've done in Axis and Allies. That represents two guys. This would represent one militia, and that simply would represent two militia. And anything else you can think of, you know, if you've got the mountain troops or whatever, each one of these different markers, they have different abilities, different attacks. The first thing to understand about Global 1936 by Historical Board Gaming is it's a D12 system. So by going to D12, you have a lot more flexibility to put a lot of different really cool rules in. D6s, they're cool, I like them, but they do constrain you in what you can do, I guess, creatively to try to recreate an atmosphere of whatever the atmosphere might be. They also put out claim tokens, and I chose the evil Nazi symbol for the claim tokens. I'm a historical buff, so I really love history, and I'm not really political when it comes to it. I'm just reenacting a conflict that actually took place. But so those are the infantry choices that you have. Here are the motorized choices that you have. So you have a mechanized and you have a mobile infantry. Now this actually might theoretically be mechanized because it's got the treads, but I couldn't find a German truck except for the ones that come out of the Battle of the Bulge game, which might be beneficial to get. There's also SS markers, which I'll explain what they're used for in a little while. And then they have three different categories of tanks. They have light tanks, they have medium tanks, and then they have heavy tanks. I also want to point out that this is technically a tank destroyer, the Stug, and I am going to have my own rules for them once I have enough models of tank destroyers for everyone. They have artillery, of course, and they have advanced artillery, which is when you achieve the technology, you can get these more fancy artillery pieces. They also have expansions to the game that you can include or not, up to you, but I decided to include the Thor railgun, so there's Thor right there. It really goes after cities, something terrible. And then I am going to also collect the Atlantic Wall, which can be built in 1942 in this game. And just to give you an overview of the turntables before I go on, this game lasts for 18 turns. So it goes from 1936 to 1945. There is a version of 1939, and I have heard that they are planning on coming out with a 42 version, but I have not seen it yet. And what I really like also, a lot of people have customized this, but Historical Board Gaming has this. You could use this for other games as well. It goes all the way up to 120 for counting your IPCs. That's really cool. But even cooler than that is what it's made out of. It's not just paper. This is like, I don't know, the stuff that you see for sale signs or whatever made out of. I mean, it's really good quality. So they don't skimp on it. So back to the pieces. Those are the air pieces that are involved in the game. You've got, and if I miss anything, please excuse me, but you have fighters, you have tactical bombers or tactical fighters, you have transports, you have strategic bombers, you have medium bombers, and then you have jet fighters. I believe I've covered all the different categories of aircraft that you have an option to get. And it's very different how they work in this game. Yes, strategic bombers still bomb strategically, and they can still attack land zones, but their combat and how they do things is different. Because they're hitting such a high altitude, they try to, I think, mimic that, or in this game. Then you've got your ships. The two new ships, so everything's kind of standard from anybody who's played Axis and Allies. I do not have the light carrier here yet, but I am supposed to get it soon, as well as one of their expansion battleships that actually never entered the war, but if the player decides they want to put the money into it, why not? But there's two other ships. There's a coastal submarine, which is this tiny little guy back here, and those start in the game, but you can't build them. And they're really not that great, but hey, they had them in their inventory, so they used them at the beginning of the war. And then the TBD, I think they call them torpedo boat destroyers, which basically are like old versions of destroyers. They cannot be built either, but you start with them, and they're degraded as far as what they can do as well. And then we've got another expansion here. I want to just talk about this. This is the Africa Corps for the Germans. So they have all the divisions, armored divisions, I believe, that Rommel had. And there's some special rules on this. And this is kind of cool. So I want you to think about, you know, why would you even care about the Africa Corps in Africa? And here's the rule they came up with, which solves one of the problems that I always had with moving troops, German troops into Africa, which is, how do I get them there? I have to buy a transport, right? If you're playing some of these other games, you got to buy a transport. Then you got to hopefully protect that transport. Then you got to, move one or two guys down a turn. You know, it's just like you get to a point where you're just thinking, I'm not going to do that. Well, the Africa Corps expansion solves that. For 5 IPCs, you can build a certain number of them. I think it's like a couple infantry, an artillery, a light tank, or 2 light tanks and a medium tank, I believe, and maybe a motorized. But anyway, you can convert them in Germany, and then you can automatically, for $5, and you can automatically transport them into Africa without having to worry about manually transporting them down there. Of course, if the Allies have enough interdiction power, then they can try to stop them. But if they don't, then you got your whole unit into Africa without having to worry about the logistics of buying transports on the or getting them around the coasts or whatever. On top of that, you can build 2 transports out of Italian ports during the game, 2 German transports. And there's one other rule for the Africa Corps which represents kind of Rommel's really good tactics, and that is his light and medium tanks can retreat even if they are the defender. So if you're in a battle and they hit you and you're thinking, you know what, I just want to withdraw and I don't want to lose my 2 tanks or my tank or whatever, you can do that as the defender. That's normally not the rule in most games of this caliber. And finally, back here, just for fun, I wanted to show how much I really do like historical war games and trying to be as historically accurate as possible. These are some of my tanks for another game that I have painted up. Some of them I painted up, some of them I had somebody who's a really good painter who does auto body work paint up. But I wanted to show you what a light tank looks like. So there's a Panzer II, in case you're not familiar with it. That is a Panzer 38. That's actually a Czech tank, but once the Germans took over Sudetenland and then later on Czechoslovakia, or the last remaining territory, they annexed them. They took over basically the production of them, and they actually liked them. Well, those two tanks in this game are represented by those two little pieces right there. Back here, I've got my, right there, there's my Panzer III. That's a medium tank, and that was early war. And my Panzer III in Axis and Allies, or Global 1936, is right there. He's not focusing, but there he is. I don't have a Panzer IV out because I don't have the model yet. They were out of them at Historical Board Gaming. But I do have a Panther. Now notice that the paint schemes have changed from gray to this camo colored. The Germans actually in 1940, late 42 or earlier 43, I think it might have been 43 more like, they started actually camouflaging their tanks. They started out painting them all gray like those early tanks, and then they started painting them camouflaged. But this is actually an Axis and Allies Panzer V or Panther. Again, I haven't gotten the new models from Historical Board Gaming. They look a little better, I think. Let's see. This guy is not even in the game. It's such a cool model. That is right there is an elephant, Ferdinand. It was built. And I think the company that built it, I can't remember if it was Porsche. They started building them, and then they didn't get the contract, and so they just basically finished up, I think 90 of them or something. And I think there's a couple still left. One's in Russia, I believe, and one has been revamped. There's actually a show on TV about revamping the elephant, or the Ferdinand. As the Germans call it the Ferdinand, I think the Russians called it the elephant because of the way it looked. I believe, anyway. And then here's the Tiger. Oh, there's the Tiger 1. This is my Tiger right here. And the commander of this tank and the number on the side is actually a famous tank ace in World War II. His name was Whitman. And he fought in the Battle of Kursk against the Russians. And then he fought against the United States and the British in 1944, I think in August. And he did some incredible feats, but he was finally killed. So he was a tank ace. There's actually other tank aces that did a better job than he did, that actually had more kills, but they weren't in line with the party line, and so they didn't get as much fame as Whitman did. Whitman was basically falling right along the line with everybody else during that time frame. There's a Stug. As I said before, it's a tank destroyer, not technically a tank. But we put, we always, when we talk about them in the tank category. And there's a Stug there. Sorry, I think the sun's coming up at the wrong time. I'll have to cut the video off here pretty quick. You're probably not seeing anything. And there's my truck. That's Opel Blitz. And there's my Hanomag. So if you want to see kind of a bigger size model of what the Hanomag and the truck looks like, there's what they would look like. So now, just one last thing. What these pieces are used for. In the game, in Global 1936, in 1943, the Germans can start building SS Panzer Grenadiers. That's what these are supposed to represent. So we would just take these models, put them on top, just like you would do with the infantry, and that would represent that he's an SS Panzer Grenadier because he has a better attack and defense, and he can actually blitz by himself. And then the other thing that we might use this for is an actual Panzer or a Tiger tank, because the Tigers can be built once you achieve the heavy armor technology, and they get attack on an 8 and defend on an 8. Well, normally heavy armor attacks on an 8, defends on a 7. So these guys are a little better, but you can only build one a turn. So you might have Tiger tanks, heavy tanks, that are not SS or that don't have that special ability. And the only difference would be they have one better defense. So that's what those are supposed to represent. So I'm going to go and try to upload this video, try to get it to work. And then I'm going to move on to my Russians and talk about the various Russian stuff. And I'll probably wait till the sun gets a little higher in the sky so that you can actually see models instead of listening to my voice and seeing the silhouettes of all this stuff on the table. But the video that we'll be doing a battle report on Global 1936 in a week, and hopefully it'll be uploaded shortly after that. So next weekend, not this weekend, which is October 21st or whatever. So it'll be next weekend. We're going to actually throw the whole thing on tape, and it should be pretty exciting to see. If you've watched any of my other battle reports in Axis and Allies, hopefully we can make Global 1936 historical board gamings as exciting. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in a few.